The rain fell hard on the streets of New Atlanta as Officer Derek Manning stepped out of his patrol car. It was late evening in the year 2247, and the city looked different than it had centuries ago. Humanity had spread across many planets and built new homes among the stars, but some things never changed. Crime still happened, and people still needed protection from those who would hurt them. Derek had been a police officer for 15 years, and he thought he had seen everything. He was wrong about that. His partner Kyle Brooks walked beside him as they moved toward the alley where someone had reported a disturbance. The lower district was always busy with trouble, and tonight was no different. Derek could see a crowd gathered around two people who were arguing near a large trash container. His computer system in his eyepiece scanned their faces and gave him information about who they were. One was a man named Vincent Cruz who sold illegal drugs. The other was a woman with dark skin who wore regular clothes. The computer said her name was Maya Collins, and she lived in the upper district, which was far from here. Derek walked up to them with confidence. He had done this 1,000 times before. Break up a fight and arrest anyone who broke the law. Simple and clean. Vincent Cruz saw the officers and immediately put his hands up. He knew better than to fight with the police. But the woman turned to face Derek, and her eyes showed no fear at all. That surprised him. She spoke before he could say anything. The man tried to sell drugs to children, and she stopped him. She was holding him until the police arrived. She even quoted some law number that gave her the right to do this. Derek felt his jaw tighten. He did not like it when regular people tried to tell him how to do his job. He told her to step back and let him handle things. She refused and said she was handling it just fine. She spoke like she was better than him, and that made Derek angry. Then Vincent Cruz ran. He saw his chance while Derek was arguing with the woman, and he took off down the alley. Derek tried to move forward, but Maya was still standing in his path. Something inside Derek snapped. All the stress from years of dangerous work and all the frustration of dealing with people who did not respect his badge came rushing out. He grabbed her, and his hands went around her throat. He pushed her back against the wall hard. For 3 seconds he held her there and squeezed. Kyle grabbed Derek and pulled him away. His partner was yelling at him, asking what he was doing. Derek let go and stepped back. His heart was pounding and his hands were shaking. Maya coughed and put one hand to her throat. With her other hand, she reached into her jacket. Derek's hand went to his gun, thinking she might pull a weapon. But what came out was an identification card that glowed with official seals and symbols. Judge Maya Collins of the Colonial Supreme Court. That is what the card said. Derek felt like the ground was falling away beneath his feet.
He had just attacked a judge.
Not just any judge, but one of the most powerful judges in the entire circuit. Maya looked at him with eyes that were calm despite what had just happened. She told him he had just assaulted a sitting judge and that there would be consequences for this. Derek wanted to say something, but no words came out. Kyle was staring at him like he did not know who Derek was anymore. The crowd that had gathered was recording everything on their devices. The body camera that Derek wore had captured every moment. There was no way to deny what he had done. No way to take it back. 3 seconds had just destroyed his entire life. Maya did not yell or threaten him. She simply straightened her jacket and told him she would see him in court. Then she walked away into the rain, leaving Derek standing there trying to understand what had just happened. Kyle called for backup and for a supervisor. Within minutes, the alley was full of police cars and official vehicles. Internal Affairs showed up and took Derek's badge and gun right there on the spot. They told him not to leave the city, and that he would be contacted soon. Derek sat in his car alone while other officers processed the scene. He watched them interview witnesses and collect evidence. He saw them talking to Kyle, who looked sick about the whole thing. This was not supposed to happen. Derek was a good cop. He had saved lives and helped people. He had commendations and awards. But none of that mattered now. All anyone would remember was those 3 seconds when he put his hands around a woman's throat. The drive home took forever. Derek kept seeing Maya's face in his mind. The way her eyes had widened when he grabbed her. The way she had struggled to breathe. He told himself he had not known who she was, but that was a lie. Even if she had not been a judge, what he did was wrong. You do not choke people just because they make you angry. That was not police work. That was assault. His wife Lisa was waiting when he got home. She had seen the news already. The story was everywhere. Video of the incident was being played over and over on every channel. Derek Manning, the police officer who attacked a judge. That was what they were calling him. Lisa did not say anything at first. She just looked at him with tears in her eyes. Their daughter Amy was asleep upstairs, and Derek was grateful for that. He did not want to see the disappointment in her face, too. Lisa finally spoke and asked him why. Why did he do it? Derek had no good answer. He said he did not know. He said it just happened. But that was not good enough, and they both knew it. Things do not just happen. People make choices. Derek had made a terrible choice, and now everyone would pay for it. His family would suffer because of what he did. He would lose his job and probably go to jail, all because he could not control his temper for 3 seconds. 2 days passed, and Derek had to go to the police station for questioning. Internal Affairs had a special room where they interviewed officers who were accused of doing wrong. The walls were bare metal and the lights were too bright. Commander Lisa Peterson sat across from Derek with a computer that recorded everything. She was known for being fair but tough, and Derek knew he was in serious trouble. She made him tell the story 6 times. Each time felt worse than the last. Derek tried to explain that he thought Maya was interfering with his work. He said the suspect ran away because she was in the way. He said he just reacted without thinking. Lisa looked at him with cold eyes and asked if choking someone was really just a reaction. She showed him the body camera footage and made him watch his own hands around Maya's throat. 3 full seconds of pressure that could have killed her. Kyle had already given his statement. He told them the truth about what happened. The body camera showed everything clearly. There was also video from people in the crowd who recorded the whole thing on their phones. Every piece of evidence said the same thing. Derek had attacked an innocent woman who was trying to stop a crime. The fact that she was a judge made it even worse, but it would have been wrong no matter who she was. The news channels played the story constantly. They showed Derek's face and talked about police violence and abuse of power. Protesters gathered outside the police station demanding that Derek be arrested. Some of Derek's fellow officers supported him and said he was a good cop who made one mistake. Others stayed quiet or said he deserved whatever punishment came. The whole city was divided over what should happen to him. 3 days after the incident, Derek received official papers. He was being charged with 3 crimes: assault, excessive use of force, and violation of civil rights. The trial would happen in the colonial court system, and the Attorney General herself would handle the prosecution. Patricia Hughes was famous for winning almost every case she took. She was in her 60s and had been putting criminals in jail for decades. The fact that she wanted this case personally told Derek how serious things were. Then came the part that made Derek's stomach turn. The judge assigned to his trial was Maya Collins. The same woman he had attacked would be the one deciding his fate. Derek's lawyer was a public defender named Gregory Stone, who looked tired and worn down. Gregory explained that they would file a motion asking Maya to remove herself from the case. It was called recusal, and it meant asking the judge to step aside because she could not be fair. No victim should judge their own attacker. That was basic justice, but Gregory did not sound hopeful. Maya Collins had a reputation for being absolutely committed to following the law. She was called the Ice Queen by some people because she never let emotions affect her decisions. She had ruled against her own friends when the law required it. If she believed she could be fair, then she might refuse to step down. Derek asked how that could be justice. Gregory just looked at him and said Derek had choked a judge, so justice was going to look different than usual. Derek went home that night and could not sleep. Lisa barely spoke to him anymore. Amy asked questions that he could not answer. Why did Daddy hurt that lady? Why are people so angry at Daddy? Why is everything changing? Derek tried to explain, but how do you tell your 12-year-old daughter that you lost control and destroyed your whole life? How do you make her understand that good people can do terrible things? The media coverage got worse. Some reporters dug into Derek's past looking for other incidents. They found a few complaints that had been filed against him over the years. Most were dismissed as unfounded, but now people were questioning everything. Was Derek always violent, or was this really just one bad moment? His friends stopped calling. People he had worked with for years avoided him. It was like he had a disease that might spread. Derek spent his days preparing for the trial with Gregory. They went over every detail of that night. Gregory asked hard questions, trying to find anything that might help. Was Derek scared when Vincent ran? Yes. Did Derek feel threatened by Maya? Not really. Did Derek think about what he was doing when he grabbed her? No, that was the problem. Derek had not thought at all. He had just acted on anger and frustration, and now he would pay for it. The motion for recusal was filed with the court. Gregory wrote pages explaining why Maya could not be fair. He cited laws and previous cases where judges had stepped aside. He argued that no reasonable person would expect a victim to judge their attacker without bias. The prosecution opposed the motion. Patricia Hughes wrote that Maya's record proved she could be impartial. She said Maya understood the law better than anyone and would follow it regardless of personal feelings. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Derek would have to stand in court and face Maya again. He would have to look at the woman he had hurt and ask her to give up the case. Part of him hoped she would say yes and remove herself. Another part of him knew she would not. Maya Collins did not seem like the type of person who backed down from anything. She had stood up to him in that alley even when he was aggressive and threatening. She had identified herself as a judge even with his hands around her throat. She was tough and principled, and that made her dangerous to Derek. Gregory warned him that if Maya refused to step aside, then the trial would be incredibly difficult. Every ruling she made would be questioned. People would say she was biased even if she tried to be fair. The media would turn it into a circus. But Maya would have thought of all that. If she chose to keep the case, then she must believe she could handle it. Derek tried to imagine sitting in a courtroom while the woman he attacked decided his future. It seemed impossible. It seemed cruel. But maybe that was the point. Maybe this was what justice looked like when you hurt someone with power. The courtroom was built into the side of a massive tower with walls made of clear material that showed the whole city below. Derek could see ships flying through the air and buildings stretching to the horizon. It should have been beautiful, but all he felt was sick to his stomach. The room was packed with reporters and citizens and other police officers. Everyone wanted to see what would happen when Derek faced Maya for the first time since that night. Derek wore his dress uniform with all his medals and awards displayed. Gregory thought it might help remind people that Derek had done good things before this. But looking at all those decorations just made Derek feel worse. Each medal represented a moment when he had been brave or helpful or noble. Now all of that was tainted by 3 seconds of violence. He wondered if the people he had saved over the years were watching this and feeling betrayed. The bailiff called for everyone to stand, and Maya entered from a door behind the bench. She wore black robes with silver symbols at the collar that marked her as a colonial court judge. There was still a faint bruise on her throat that makeup could not quite hide. She walked with perfect posture and took her seat without looking at Derek. When she finally did glance his way, her face showed nothing. No anger or fear or satisfaction. Just calm professional distance. Maya spoke in a clear, strong voice. They were here to address the motion for recusal filed by the defense. Gregory could present his argument. Derek watched his lawyer stand and walk to the center of the room. Gregory was good at his job, but he looked small compared to Maya sitting up on the bench. He explained that while everyone respected Maya's commitment to justice, the defense believed she could not be fair. No matter how hard she tried, there would always be personal feelings involved. She was the victim of the crime. She could not judge the person who hurt her without bias. Maya listened without interrupting and took notes on a tablet. When Gregory finished, she asked Patricia Hughes for the prosecution's response. Patricia stood up, and Derek could see why she was feared in courtrooms. She was elegant and confident, and her voice carried authority. She said the prosecution opposed the motion. Maya Collins had 30 years of experience and a perfect record of fairness. She had ruled against friends and political allies when the law required it. The defense was making assumptions without evidence. They should trust in Maya's ability to separate personal experience from judicial duty. Maya nodded and then turned back to Gregory. She asked him directly if he had any proof that she could not be fair. Any examples of bias in her past rulings? Any indication beyond the simple fact that she was involved? Gregory hesitated because Maya's record was spotless. Everyone knew she was famous for being absolutely fair no matter what. He argued that the situation itself was the evidence. No human being could be expected to be objective when judging their own attacker. Maya leaned back in her chair and spoke about humanity. She said humans had spread across the stars and built civilizations on worlds that tried to kill them. They had survived because they learned to rise above their emotions when necessary. That was the foundation of law in the colonies. She admitted that when Derek grabbed her, she had been afraid and angry. Those were natural human responses. But she was also a judge who had spent 3 decades proving that her word meant something. Derek felt a chill as Maya's eyes focused on him. She said the motion for recusal was denied. She would preside over the trial. But she was ordering something special. An independent panel of 3 other judges would watch every ruling she made in real time. If they saw any sign of bias, they could overturn her decisions immediately and remove her from the case. This trial would be the most watched and scrutinized in colonial history. She would not allow any question about fairness to stand. She struck her gavel and said jury selection would begin in 1 week. Both sides would have extra challenges to make sure they got the most impartial jury possible. Then she left the bench and the courtroom exploded with noise. Reporters were talking into cameras. People in the gallery were arguing about the decision. Gregory put a hand on Derek's shoulder and said they had tried. Now they had to prepare for the hardest fight of Derek's life. Derek looked back at the gallery and saw Lisa sitting with tears running down her face. Amy was holding her mother's hand, looking confused and scared. His little girl did not understand why everyone was so angry. She did not understand why her father might go to jail. Derek wanted to go to them, but guards were waiting to process him, and Gregory was pulling him toward a side door. Outside the courtroom, reporters shoved microphones at Derek, asking for comments. Gregory pushed through them, saying they had nothing to say right now. Someone yelled, asking Derek if he thought he could get a fair trial from the woman he attacked. Another voice asked if he had apologized to Judge Collins. Derek kept his head down and kept walking. There was nothing he could say that would help. Anything he said would just be used against him. The drive back to his apartment felt like the longest trip of his life. Derek kept thinking about Maya's face when she denied the motion. She had been so calm and controlled. How could someone be that composed when facing the person who hurt them? Most people would want revenge. Most people would use their power to crush someone who had wronged them. But Maya was not most people. She was something else entirely. She was the law made into human form. That night, Derek could not eat. Lisa made dinner, but it sat on the table getting cold. Amy kept asking questions, and Lisa finally sent her to her room. Then Lisa turned to Derek and asked what they were going to do. Derek had no answer. Everything was out of his control now. His fate rested in the hands of 12 strangers who would be selected for the jury. And above them all would sit Maya Collins, watching everything with those calm, calculating eyes. Gregory called that evening and said they needed to prepare. The trial would move fast once jury selection was done. They needed to build Derek's character defense and find witnesses who could testify about his good work. They needed to show the jury that Derek was more than those 3 seconds of violence. He was a father and husband and dedicated officer who had simply made a terrible mistake. Gregory said juries could be sympathetic to human error if it was presented correctly, but Derek barely heard him. All he could think about was standing in that courtroom while Maya decided his future. She had all the power now. She could sentence him to years in prison. She could destroy what was left of his life with a single decision, and there was nothing Derek could do except wait and hope that the woman he had attacked would show him mercy he probably did not deserve. Jury selection took 4 long days. Derek sat at the defense table watching as potential jurors were brought in one by one. Gregory asked them questions, trying to figure out who might be sympathetic. Patricia did the same from her side, trying to eliminate anyone who might favor police officers. Maya watched it all from the bench, making sure both sides followed the rules. The panel of 3 judges monitoring her appeared on screens to her right, ready to intervene if she showed any bias. The final jury was unlike anything Derek had ever seen. There were 4 humans of different backgrounds and ages, 3 people from Centauri with their distinctive silver eyes, 2 colonists from Mars, 2 android citizens who had full legal rights under colonial law, and 1 dolphin in a special tank that allowed movement. The dolphin species had been given intelligence and citizenship decades ago. Gregory told Derek that Maya had intentionally created the most diverse jury possible. She wanted this trial to represent all of humanity's reach across the stars. On Monday morning, the trial officially began. The courtroom was even more crowded than before. Security was everywhere because people had made threats against both Derek and Maya. Derek wore his uniform again and tried to sit up straight. He wanted to look confident, but his hands would not stop shaking. Maya entered and took her seat. She looked at the jury and then at both lawyers. Her voice was steady as she declared the court in session. Patricia stood to give her opening statement. She commanded the room just by standing there. Her gray suit was perfect and her silver hair was pulled back tight. She began by talking about power. The power society gives to police officers, the power to enforce laws and maintain order and use force when needed. That power was sacred and dangerous. When it was abused, the people who abused it had to be held accountable. She activated a hologram that showed the body camera footage. Derek watched himself grab Maya and push her against the wall. He watched his hands squeeze her throat. He watched her face contort in pain and fear. The jury watched too, and Derek could see their reactions. Some looked angry. Some looked sad. None looked sympathetic. Patricia let the video play twice, then paused it with Derek's hands frozen around Maya's throat. This was not policing, Patricia said. This was assault. Derek had not subdued a suspect or protected anyone. He had attacked a civilian who was trying to do his job for him. When that civilian identified herself as a judge, Derek realized the magnitude of his mistake. Patricia walked slowly in front of the jury. She asked them to consider if Derek's hands had been around their throats. Would they accept poor judgment as an excuse? Would they trust that officer to patrol their streets? She talked about humanity surviving among the stars. They had learned to be better than their worst impulses. They had learned that authority without accountability was tyranny. The prosecution would prove beyond reasonable doubt that Derek committed assault and violated his oath. He had to face consequences. She thanked the jury and sat down. Gregory stood for the defense, and Derek could see the strain on his face. This was an uphill battle, and everyone knew it. Gregory did not pretend Derek's actions were perfect. They were not. But he asked the jury to consider context. Derek had served New Atlanta for 15 years. He had 3 commendations for bravery, including saving a family from a burning building. He worked the most dangerous districts where crime was constant, and decisions had to be made in seconds. Gregory showed Derek's service record with all his achievements highlighted. On the night in question, Derek responded to a disturbance. He found a known drug dealer arguing with a civilian. When he tried to take control, the civilian refused to comply. She stood in his way. The suspect fled because of the interference. Derek reacted. Was it the right reaction? No. Should he have maintained better control? Absolutely. But this was not malice or abuse of power. This was a good officer making a bad decision in a stressful moment. Gregory's voice softened as he reminded the jury what Maya had said during the recusal hearing. Humanity survived among the stars by learning to rise above bias and emotion. He agreed with that statement. He asked the jury to rise above the emotion of the video and see the full picture. See the officer who dedicated his life to protecting others. See the context of a dangerous situation. Ask themselves if justice was served by destroying a good man's life over 3 seconds of poor judgment. He sat down and Maya addressed the court. Patricia could call her first witness. Patricia stood and said the prosecution called Judge Maya Collins to the stand. A murmur went through the gallery. It was unusual for a judge to be a witness in their own courtroom, but Maya had anticipated this. She stood and removed her robes, showing a simple gray suit underneath. She walked to the witness stand with the same calm grace she showed everywhere. The bailiff administered the oath, asking if she swore to tell the truth. Maya said she did in a clear voice. Patricia approached and asked her to tell the court what happened on October 15th. Maya recounted everything with perfect precision. She had been walking through the lower district after a community program. She saw Vincent Cruz trying to sell drugs to teenagers. She intervened and cited the colonial law that allowed citizens to detain suspects. When Derek arrived, she explained the situation, but he became agitated. When Vincent fled, Derek grabbed her by the throat and pushed her against a wall. Patricia asked how long Derek held her. Approximately 3 seconds, Maya answered. Patricia asked what Maya felt during those 3 seconds. Gregory objected, saying feelings were not relevant to facts. Patricia argued that the defense claimed 3 seconds was not serious. She was establishing the impact of those 3 seconds. Maya looked at the monitoring panel. One of the judges nodded. The objection was overruled. Maya could answer. Maya took a breath and said she felt fear. Her airway was restricted and she could not breathe. For those 3 seconds, she believed she might die. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the camera drones seemed to hover more quietly. Patricia asked about Maya's experience. How many assault cases had she presided over in 30 years? 417, Maya answered. Based on that extensive experience was what Derek did assault. Gregory stood to object, but Patricia withdrew the question before he could speak. Gregory approached for cross-examination. He asked if it was common for civilians to quote specific legal codes to police officers. Maya said it was not common but not unheard of. She encouraged civic education. Gregory suggested that Maya's knowledge and authority as a judge might have been intimidating to Derek. Might it have made him feel challenged? Maya's eyes narrowed slightly. She asked if Gregory was suggesting a police officer should be threatened by a citizen who knows their rights. Gregory had no good answer and ended his questions. Maya returned to the bench and put her robes back on. The trial continued with more witnesses. The teenagers who Vincent had approached testified that Maya protected them. People from the crowd corroborated the timeline. Kyle took the stand and reluctantly admitted Derek's actions violated department protocols. His voice was sad as he testified against his partner, but he told the truth. The body camera footage was analyzed frame by frame. Medical experts talked about the bruising on Maya's throat and the danger of even brief strangulation. Every piece of evidence pointed to Derek's guilt. Gregory spent 3 days calling witnesses for the defense. He brought in fellow officers who talked about Derek's dedication and bravery. Officer Carlos Martinez told the jury about a time Derek talked down an armed suspect instead of shooting him. Officer Rachel Cooper described how Derek had mentored younger officers and taught them to use restraint. Each testimony painted Derek as someone who cared about doing the right thing. Someone who had spent 15 years proving he was one of the good ones. A family named the Hendersons took the stand. 5 years ago, their apartment building caught fire. Derek had been first on the scene and ran inside before the fire department arrived. He carried their 2 children out through smoke and flames. The mother cried as she testified. She said Derek saved her babies' lives and she would never forget it. She said he was a hero. Gregory let that word hang in the air. Hero. That was what Derek had been before those 3 seconds. A psychologist named Dr. Benjamin Clark testified about police stress. He explained that officers faced constant danger and pressure. Their bodies were always flooded with adrenaline. Sometimes that led to mistakes. Derek had been dealing with a tense situation, and his training failed him for a moment. It did not make him a bad person. It made him human. Dr. Clark said with proper counseling and retraining, Derek could return to being an effective officer, but Patricia destroyed each witness on cross-examination. She asked the officers if department protocol allowed choking civilians. They admitted it did not. She asked the Hendersons if saving children 5 years ago excused attacking a woman today. They had no answer. She asked Dr. Clark if stress excused assault. He said no, but tried to explain context. Patricia cut him off. Context did not change facts. Derek put his hands around an innocent woman's throat. That was assault regardless of his past good deeds. The prosecution had recorded statements from 3 other people who claimed Derek had been aggressive with them during arrests. The incidents had all been investigated and dismissed as unfounded, but Patricia brought them up anyway. She suggested a pattern of behavior. Maybe Derek had always had anger issues. Maybe that night in the alley was not an isolated incident. But the moment he finally got caught, Gregory objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. The jury heard those accusations. On the 8th day of trial, the prosecution rested. Gregory presented his closing argument. He stood before the jury and reminded them of everything Derek had accomplished. 15 years of service, 3 commendations, lives saved. He showed pictures of Derek with Lisa and Amy, a family man, a dedicated officer, someone who made one terrible mistake, but should not have his entire life destroyed because of it. Gregory's voice was passionate as he begged the jury to see the whole person, not just 3 seconds of video. He talked about mercy and redemption. He said humanity built its civilization on the idea that people could learn from mistakes. They could grow and become better. If the jury convicted Derek of serious crimes, he would go to prison and never work as an officer again. His family would suffer. His daughter would grow up with a father behind bars, all for 3 seconds when stress and poor judgment overwhelmed his training. Gregory asked the jury to find Derek guilty of a lesser charge. Acknowledge the mistake, but do not destroy his life. That was real justice. Patricia gave her final statement, and her voice was quiet but powerful. She used the old phrase that humans had carried to the stars. Humanity fuck, yeah. People said those words with pride. They said them because humanity survived and thrived and built amazing things. But what made them worthy of that pride? Was it strength or technology? No. It was commitment to justice. refusal to let power go unchecked, willingness to hold even protectors accountable. She pointed at Derek. Officer Manning must be held accountable, not to destroy him but to prove humanity was who they claimed to be. She reminded the jury of Maya's bruised throat, of the fear in her eyes during those 3 seconds, of the teenagers who watched a police officer attack someone trying to protect them. What message would it send if Derek got away with a minor charge? It would say badges were shields from consequences. It would say authority could not be questioned. That was not justice. That was tyranny. Patricia sat down and Maya instructed the jury. She explained the 3 charges: assault under colonial law, excessive use of force, violation of civil rights. The jury had to decide if Derek was guilty of each charge. They had to base their decision only on evidence presented in court. They should not let sympathy or emotion cloud their judgment. Justice required clear thinking. She sent them to deliberate. 18 hours passed. Derek sat in a waiting room, unable to eat or sleep. Lisa stayed with him, but they barely spoke. What was there to say? Their entire future rested with 12 strangers in a room. Gregory paced and muttered to himself. He said 18 hours was good. It meant the jury was divided. Some wanted to convict and some wanted to acquit. They were arguing and debating. That was better than a quick verdict, which would definitely be guilty. But Lisa said maybe they were just deciding how severely to punish him. Maybe they all agreed Derek was guilty and were now discussing what that meant. Gregory had no response to that. They just waited. Time moved so slowly it felt like torture. Derek thought about Amy. She was staying with Lisa's sister during the trial. She did not need to see her father waiting to learn if he would go to prison. But Derek missed her. He wanted to hug her and tell her everything would be okay, but he could not promise that. At 2:47 in the afternoon on the 3rd day of deliberation, the bailiff came out. The jury had reached a verdict. Derek's heart started pounding so hard he thought he might pass out. They walked back into the courtroom and Derek saw it was even more packed than before. News of the verdict had spread and everyone wanted to see what happened. Maya entered and took her seat. Her face showed nothing, no hint of what she was thinking or feeling. She asked if the jury had reached a verdict. The foreman was one of the android citizens designated as Unit 47. His synthetic voice was clear and emotionless as he said they had. Maya told him to read the verdict. On the charge of assault under colonial law, they found Derek Manning guilty. Lisa's sob cut through the courtroom. Derek felt like he was falling. On the charge of excessive use of force, they found the defendant guilty. Amy would cry when she heard this. On the charge of violation of civil rights, they found the defendant guilty. Derek's knees almost buckled. Gregory's hand on his shoulder was the only thing keeping him standing. Guilty on all counts. His career was over. His reputation destroyed. He would go to prison. Maya struck her gavel once. Derek had been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing would take place 1 week from today. He would remain free on bond until then. Court was adjourned. The gavel struck again and Maya left the bench. People in the gallery were crying and shouting. Some celebrated the verdict. Others looked devastated. Police officers who had supported Derek walked out with their heads down. Activists hugged each other, feeling vindicated. Reporters rushed to get statements. Derek just stood there frozen. This was really happening. The woman he attacked had overseen his trial. The jury had convicted him. Now that same woman would decide his punishment. How many years would she give him? 5, 10, maybe more. His life as he knew it was over. The week between verdict and sentencing felt like an eternity. Derek's story had spread far beyond New Atlanta. Every colony in the circuit was talking about it. Then other circuits picked it up. Eventually, even Earth itself heard about the police officer who attacked a judge and the judge who presided over his trial. The debate raged everywhere. Some said Maya was brave for not stepping aside. Others called her vindictive and said no victim should judge their attacker. But most people just watched and waited to see what would happen. Derek received hundreds of messages. Fellow officers wrote saying they supported him and that he was being railroaded by political correctness. Activists wrote demanding he get the maximum sentence as an example to all police who abused their power. Regular citizens wrote telling their own stories about encounters with police. Some good and some bad, but 3 letters stood out from all the rest. The first came from Vincent Cruz, forwarded through his lawyer. Vincent was in prison on Europa for unrelated charges. He wrote that he knew he had no right to say anything because he was a criminal. He made bad choices. But he was there that night and saw what happened. He said Maya treated him like a person who was making a mistake instead of trash. When Derek grabbed her, Vincent saw the fear in her face. But she never stopped being tough. Vincent said he did not know what was right. Maybe Derek was not a bad guy. Maybe it was just a bad moment. But Maya did not deserve what happened. Nobody did. He hoped Derek found peace with whatever sentence came. Derek read that letter 5 times. Vincent Cruz, the drug dealer, was showing more insight than some people Derek had known for years. Vincent saw Maya as a person. He saw her fear and her strength. He saw that she deserved respect even though she was his enemy in that moment. Derek had failed to see any of that. He had only seen someone getting in his way, someone challenging his authority. He had been so caught up in his own anger that he forgot Maya was human. The second letter came from a woman named Claire Morrison who lived in the Upper District. She wrote that Derek did not know her. 20 years ago, he had pulled over her son for speeding. The boy was scared and young and stupid. He reached for his registration too fast and Derek drew his weapon. Derek could have shot him. The law said he was within his rights if he felt threatened. But Derek did not shoot. He took a breath and talked to the boy and let him go with a warning. Claire's son was a doctor now. He saved lives. He was alive because Derek showed restraint that night. Claire wrote that she was not saying what Derek did to Maya was right. It was not right at all. But she wanted Derek to know he had also done right. That had to count for something. Derek cried when he read her letter. He had forgotten about that traffic stop. It was 20 years ago and seemed insignificant. But to Claire and her son, it was everything. One moment of restraint had saved a life. One moment of losing restraint had destroyed Derek's own life. The parallel was painful. The third letter was the shortest and came from an unexpected source. The return address said Chambers, Colonial Court, 7th Circuit. Maya had written to him. Derek's hands shook as he opened it. She wrote that she had presided over many cases in 30 years. She had seen the best and worst of humanity. She had sentenced people to prison and to death. She had also granted clemency and second chances. In 1 week, she would decide his fate. She wanted him to know she would not let anger guide her. She would not let fear guide her. She would let the law guide her as it always had. But she would also let hope guide her. Hope that humanity could learn and grow and be better. They would see if that hope was warranted. Derek read Maya's letter over and over until he had it memorized. She was telling him something important. She was saying his fate was not predetermined. She had not already decided to crush him out of revenge. She was actually thinking about what justice meant, what the right sentence would be. That gave Derek a tiny bit of hope even though he knew he deserved punishment. At least Maya was being fair. At least she was treating this seriously instead of just lashing out. He thought about the man he had been 15 years ago when he first became an officer. Young and idealistic and determined to help people, he thought about Claire Morrison's son and how Derek had shown restraint. He could have shot that boy but chose not to. Why had Derek been capable of restraint then but not in the alley with Maya? What had changed? Was it years of stress? Was it seeing too much crime and violence? Was it something darker that had always been inside him? Derek did not know. On the night before sentencing, Derek sat with Lisa and Amy in their apartment. They could see New Atlanta through the window. The city was beautiful at night with lights everywhere and ships moving through the air. It looked peaceful, but Derek knew better. Down in those streets, crime still happened. People still hurt each other. Officers still tried to keep order. The work went on whether Derek was part of it or not. Amy hugged her father and said he made a mistake, but he was still her hero. Derek almost broke down. How could she still see him that way? He had been convicted of assault. He had choked a woman. He had betrayed everything the badge stood for. But Amy was 12 and saw things simply. Her dad was good. He made a mistake. He was still good. Derek wished the world worked that way. Wished one mistake did not erase 15 years of service. But it did not work that way. Actions had consequences. Lisa finally spoke and asked what Derek thought would happen tomorrow. He said honestly that he did not know. The prosecution wanted 5 years in prison. Gregory would ask for probation and community service. Maya could give anything in between or even more than 5 years if she wanted. There was no way to predict what she would do. All they could do was show up and face it. Lisa nodded and they sat together in silence. Derek barely slept that night. He kept thinking about standing in front of Maya while she pronounced sentence. Would she look at him with anger or pity or nothing at all? Would she give a speech about why she chose the sentence? Would she mention those 3 seconds, or would she talk about his whole life? Every possibility ran through Derek's mind. He finally got up at dawn and got dressed. He put on his uniform one last time. All the medals and commendations displayed. Gregory said to remind Maya who Derek was before that night. Show her the officer, not just the criminal. The drive to the courthouse felt surreal, like Derek was watching himself from outside his body. Lisa held his hand, but neither spoke. What was there to say? In a few hours, Derek would know if he was going to prison, if he would lose years of his life, if his daughter would grow up visiting him behind bars. The not knowing was torture, but soon it would be over. One way or another, Maya would decide, and Derek would have to live with it. He just hoped whatever she chose left him with some kind of future. The courtroom was more crowded than it had ever been. Every seat was filled and people stood along the walls. Security was everywhere. They had received threats saying protesters would disrupt the sentencing. Police officers loyal to Derek sat on one side of the gallery. Activists demanding harsh punishment sat on the other. Reporters filled the rest of the space with cameras ready to capture everything. The whole city seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what Maya would do. Derek stood at the defense table wearing his dress uniform. Every medal gleamed under the courtroom lights. Gregory had told him to look proud, but Derek just felt numb. Lisa and Amy sat directly behind him. He could hear Amy crying softly. She understood more than anyone wanted to admit. Today her father might be taken away. Maya entered and everyone stood. She wore her black robes and carried herself with perfect dignity. She took her seat and looked at Derek. Her face showed nothing. She told Derek to rise. He stood and his heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. Maya said the jury had found him guilty of assault, excessive use of force, and violation of civil rights. Before she passed sentence, she wanted to address something that had been said throughout the trial. Many asked if she could be impartial, if she could judge the man who attacked her without letting personal anger influence her decision. She wanted to answer that question publicly and permanently. Maya said she was angry. She was angry that night when Derek's hands were around her throat. She was angry when she saw fear in those teenagers' eyes as they watched an authority figure attack a civilian. She was still angry. But anger channeled properly became something else. It became clarity. Derek felt those words like a physical weight. She was admitting her anger, but saying it made her think more clearly, not less. That was somehow more frightening than if she had just been furious. Maya turned her full attention to Derek. She said she had read his service record, letters from people he helped and lives he saved, testimony from fellow officers about his dedication. She had also seen the video of him attacking her. These things all existed at the same time. He was not simply a monster or a hero. He was a human being with all the complexity that meant. Derek felt tears starting but fought them back. He would not cry. Not now. The question before Maya was not whether Derek should be punished. The jury decided guilt and punishment must follow. The question was what form that punishment should take. The prosecution recommended 5 years in prison, a felony conviction, and permanent loss of his badge. That was within Maya's power to give. Lisa sobbed behind Derek. Amy was crying harder now. 5 years seemed like forever. Derek would miss so much of his daughter's life. Her teenage years, graduation, everything. But Maya said she had to consider the purpose of sentencing. Was it purely punitive, or did it serve a greater goal? Humanity spread across the stars because they learned to balance justice with mercy, punishment with rehabilitation, accountability with opportunity for growth. Derek barely dared to hope. Was she about to show him mercy? Or was she building up to something worse? He could not tell from her voice. Maya said she spent the past week reviewing every assault case she ever presided over. 417 cases. She looked at sentences she gave and outcomes for defendants. The harshest sentences did not always produce the best results. Sometimes they just created broken people who could never contribute to society again. But sentences that included accountability and a path forward. Those changed lives. Derek's breath caught. A path forward. That sounded like she might give him a chance. Maya said she was going to do something unprecedented. She would explain her reasoning fully so there was no doubt about her intentions. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the camera drones seemed to stop moving. Derek was holding his breath. Maya said he put his hands around her throat. He used his authority as a police officer to attack a civilian who was trying to prevent a crime. That was unacceptable and must have consequences. If there were no consequences, then the badge became a license for tyranny. Humanity could not afford that. However, Derek was also a man who spent 15 years serving the colony. He risked his life to protect others. He showed restraint when others might have used violence. He had been by most measures a good officer. That also must be acknowledged. Maya paused, and Derek could barely stand the suspense. What was his sentence? Prison or something else? His future hung on Maya's next words. Maya announced the sentence. 3 years in a colonial rehabilitation facility, with possibility of parole after 18 months based on good behavior and completion of required programs. 500 hours of community service in the lower district working with at-risk youth, counseling for stress management and bias awareness, and permanent loss of certification as a peace officer. Derek felt the weight of it settle on him. Prison, but not 5 years. The end of his career, but a chance at parole. It was harsh, but it was also merciful. He would see Amy grow up. He would not lose everything. Maya was not finished. She said Derek would participate in a new program she was establishing, the Accountability and Reform Initiative. He would tell his story, what happened that night, why it happened, what he learned. He would speak at police academies and community centers, anywhere that could benefit from understanding how good people make terrible choices. Derek nodded. He could do that. He would do whatever Maya asked if it meant he got a second chance. Maya said humanity, fuck yeah. Those words were said with pride. But pride must be earned. It was earned when people held themselves accountable. When they admitted mistakes and worked to be better. Derek had an opportunity to contribute to that legacy, to help ensure what happened to Maya did not happen to others. She suggested he take it. Then she struck her gavel. Court was adjourned. Guards came forward to process Derek. He would be taken to the facility today. Lisa rushed to him and they hugged. Amy was sobbing and Derek held her tight. He told her he loved her. He would see her soon. 18 months was not forever. He would be okay. Amy did not want to let go, but the guards were patient. They waited until Derek kissed his daughter's forehead and stepped back. As they led him away, Derek looked up at the bench one last time. Maya was still there watching. Their eyes met, and for the first time since that night in the alley, he saw something other than judicial distance. He saw humanity. He saw someone who understood that justice was not simple, that people were complicated, that the right path was rarely easy. Derek mouthed the words, "Thank you." Maya nodded, once then left the bench. In the gallery, people were arguing about the sentence. Some said it was too harsh. Others said it was too lenient. Police officers looked relieved it was not 5 years. Activists were angry it was not more. But Maya had not sentenced Derek to please anyone. She sentenced him based on what she believed was right, what would serve justice in society and give Derek a chance to be better. That was all anyone could ask from a judge. Derek was processed and transported to the rehabilitation facility that same day. It was not as bad as a regular prison, more like a secure campus where people worked on bettering themselves. He had a small room with a bed and desk. There were classes and counseling and work programs. Derek would spend the next 18 months learning to control his anger and understand his biases, learning to be the officer he should have been in that alley, and then he would spend years teaching others so they did not make his mistakes. It was not the future Derek imagined when he first put on the badge 15 years ago. But it was a future. He was not destroyed. He was being rebuilt into something better, and he had Maya Collins to thank for that. The woman he attacked had shown him more mercy than he deserved. She had given him a path forward. Now it was up to Derek to walk it. 3 years had passed since that day in the courtroom. Derek stood at a podium in the new Atlanta Police Academy auditorium, looking at rows of young faces. Fresh cadets in crisp new uniforms ready to protect and serve. They came from a dozen different worlds and 100 different backgrounds. This was humanity's next generation of officers. Derek's job was to make sure they learned from his mistakes. He introduced himself and told them that 3 years ago, he was one of them. He wore the badge with pride and believed he was one of the good ones. Then in 3 seconds he proved himself wrong. The holographic display behind him activated, showing the body camera footage that had become famous across all the colonies. Derek watched it with the cadets forcing himself not to look away. That was him attacking Judge Maya Collins. That was him letting stress and frustration and bias overcome his training. Derek told them he said later that he did not know Maya was a judge. As if that mattered. As if what he did would have been acceptable if she was anyone else. He paused and let that sink in. The cadets were paying close attention. Some looked uncomfortable watching the video. Good. They should be uncomfortable. This was what happened when an officer forgot their purpose. He told them he served 2 years before parole. He lost his career and reputation. He nearly lost his family, but he gained perspective and understanding. And he gained a mission. He showed statistics about complaints filed against colonial peace officers every year. Most were unfounded, but some were legitimate. Cases like his where good people made terrible choices. Those choices eroded public trust and endangered lives. They betrayed everything the badge represented. Derek looked at the young faces watching him. They would face situations that tested them. They would be scared and angry and frustrated. They would deal with people who hated them just for wearing the uniform. In those moments, they would have a choice. Be what he was that night or be what he should have been, someone who rose above. A young cadet named Lisa Park raised her hand. She asked how they could know they would not make the same mistake. How could they guarantee being better? Derek smiled sadly. They could not guarantee it. That was the truth. They were human and would make mistakes. But they could prepare. They could train. They could build mental discipline to pause even for 1 second before acting. And they could remember that the person in front of them, no matter how angry or frustrating, was also human. They had the same right to safety and dignity. After the presentation, Derek met with small groups answering questions and sharing stories. The program Maya mandated had become his life's work. He spoke at academies and community centers and courts across the 7th Circuit. He had also become an advocate for police reform, working with lawmakers to improve training and establish oversight. The work was hard but meaningful. Every officer who learned from Derek's mistake was one less person who might repeat it. That evening, Derek returned to his apartment in the Mid-District. His parole ended 6 months ago, but he chose to stay here. He was closer to the communities that needed voices like his. His communication device chimed with a message from an unknown sender. He opened it carefully. It was from Vincent Cruz. Vincent said he got out of prison last month and had been clean for a year. He wanted to thank Derek for his talk at the community center. Derek probably did not remember him, but Vincent remembered that night. He remembered being part of the problem. Derek's story helped Vincent own his part in it. He started a new job tomorrow. Legitimate work. He just wanted to say thanks. Everyone was trying to be better, right? Derek stared at the message for a long time, then typed a reply. He told Vincent that he remembered him. He was glad Vincent was doing better. They were all works in progress. Good luck with the new job. It felt strange to be corresponding with the drug dealer whose escape had triggered everything. But Vincent was not just a drug dealer. He was a person trying to change, just like Derek. They were both proof that people could learn and grow. Another message arrived from an address Derek recognized immediately. Judge Collins's chambers. His heart rate picked up as he opened it. Maya wrote that she attended his presentation at the academy today. She was in the back observing. He spoke well and honestly. That took courage. She wanted him to know the Accountability and Reform Initiative was expanding. 5 more circuits had adopted the program. His story was helping to change how humanity trained its protectors. That was the best possible outcome of a terrible situation. Be well. Derek read Maya's message 3 times. She had been there today and he never saw her. She watched him tell the story of attacking her, watched him take responsibility and try to teach others, and she thought he did well. After everything he had done to her, Maya was still supporting him, still believing he could contribute something positive. That level of grace was almost impossible to comprehend. Derek wanted to reply but did not know what to say. Thank you seemed inadequate. Sorry seemed too late. Finally, he just wrote that he would keep working to honor the chance she gave him. He thought about that night in the alley 3 years ago. His hands around her throat. The fear in her eyes. The rage he had felt. It seemed like a different lifetime. A different person. But it was him. That capacity for violence lived inside Derek and always would. The difference now was that he understood it. He watched for it. He controlled it. And he taught others to do the same. That was his penance. That was his purpose. Derek pulled up his calendar for tomorrow. 3 presentations scheduled. A meeting with a colonial senator about proposed reforms. Dinner with Lisa and Amy, who had stood by him through everything. His life was full and busy, not what he imagined when he first became an officer, but meaningful in ways that old life never was. He had been a police officer who enforced laws, then he was a criminal who broke them. Now he was something else, a teacher, an advocate, a living example of both failure and redemption. Another message appeared, a different academy requesting his presence, another group of cadets who needed to hear his story. Derek accepted the invitation and began preparing. This was his life now, telling the same story over and over, showing his worst moment to strangers and explaining what he learned. It was humbling and exhausting and absolutely necessary. Every cadet who learned from Derek's mistake was a potential victim who would never be hurt. That made it worthwhile. Across the city in her chambers, Maya Collins reviewed case files for the next day. Her throat had healed long ago. The bruises faded to nothing. But the memory remained as it should. Memory was how humanity learned from the past and built a better future. She thought about the trial and her decision to preside over Derek's case. Many people said she was crazy or vindictive or foolish, but she trusted in the law and the process. She believed justice could be more than punishment. 3 years later, the results spoke for themselves. The Accountability and Reform Initiative had trained over 10,000 officers. Complaints of excessive force in the 7th Circuit dropped by 40%. Other circuits were seeing similar results. One case, one sentence, one chance given. That was how change happened. Not through anger or revenge, but through the hard work of believing people could be better and giving them tools to prove it. Maya smiled slightly and closed the case file. Justice was never simple, but it was always worth pursuing. Humanity spread across the stars, building civilizations and refusing to accept that might made right. They kept proving the pursuit was worthwhile. 3 seconds had nearly destroyed 2 lives, but the years that followed rebuilt them into something stronger, something that would help countless others. That was the real meaning of humanity, fuck yeah. Not perfection, not dominance, but relentless, stubborn, beautiful commitment to being better today than yesterday, and better tomorrow than today. The stars shone over New Atlanta. Beneath them, humanity continued its endless work of building justice one difficult choice at a time. Derek Manning and Maya Collins were proof that even the worst moments could lead to something good. That people could rise above their failures. That justice was not about revenge, but about creating a future where mistakes became lessons. And in that future, young officers learned from Derek's story. They understood that the badge was not a shield from accountability. They knew that 3 seconds of anger could destroy everything. They practiced restraint and patience and respect for the people they served. Some of them would still make mistakes. That was inevitable. But fewer mistakes, smaller mistakes. Mistakes they could learn from instead of being destroyed by. That was progress. That was hope. That was humanity at its best. Learning and growing and refusing to give up on each other. Derek had choked a judge, and that judge gave him a second chance. Now he spent his life earning that chance by making sure others did not need one. The circle was complete. Justice was served. And humanity continued reaching for the stars, knowing that the hardest journey was not across space but toward becoming worthy of the pride they carried. Humanity, fuck yeah, indeed.